You know what? Just to make it interesting, I'll start sharing my screen right now. You'll see fun flashes of what it's like to be a founder. There are so many random applications open right now. This is a friend startup whose startup basically beat out one of our old ideas and is just doing it so much better than us. You got this awesome app called Superhuman, which is a really kick-ass email client. I hope no one in high school has enough email to need, anything more than Gmail. But I don't know these days, I'm seeing like high school level like internships. Like internships did not exist when I was in high school, which was like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Different world.
It's funny how like in our high school there's a program they require you to do a what is it 200-hour internship after junior year.
Yeah,
just crazy.
It's really crazy. It's really crazy. They cut it down this year because of COVID, but
yeah. Oh god.
Of course, you got to have photo booth to check yourself out before entering the Zoom call.
That's an awesome pro tip, dude.
Yeah, it's a pretty amateur tip at the end of the day, all things considered. Okay, and let's see. Now, if I hit present. As you'll probably be able to tell in my outfit, my slides, and my language, I don't have a lot of flour in me. So these slides will be very plain, and I think the colorful part will hopefully be our conversation and stories we can exchange and things of that nature. Let me see what configuration feels good. Let's do this. Let's do that. That's kind of big. Except like half of the screen. There we go. That's good enough.
Yeah, looks good.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, ready to start whenever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're good to start.
Cool. All right. Well, for everyone here, thanks so much for being here. Mingji and Brian and Megan, whenever you get here too, thanks so much for having me. I wish Execute Get Big kind of existed when I was in high school. That would have been pretty sweet, but alas, it didn't. So y'all are really lucky, and I hope you enjoy what's going on in the next few weeks. So yeah, a little bit about myself. My name is Mohib. It's a Middle Eastern name. It's the root word for love, actually, in Arabic, mohabbat. So Mohib means one who loves. I'm a very loving guy, as the name may imply. And I guess more seriously, I am a bachelor's and master's student at Harvard, studying electrical and computer engineering, though I do close to nothing related to electrical or computer engineering. That's just kind of how it is at a liberal arts school. In terms of what I'm doing right now, I'm the co-founder of Seed. I'm happy to talk about Seed later, but overall, our whole thing is we're building products to bring philanthropy to every single person in the world. Pretty exciting stuff we're doing at Seed right now. Before Seed, I took some time off from school and I was a project manager at Tesla. So I used to work on the manufacturing team and then very quickly moved over to the design team. And we were focused on autopilot. That was the team that I was on. So if you saw that full self-driving that just got shipped last year, Execute Big student, come on in. Yeah, so if you saw the full self-driving that just got released, which is fully, hands off the steering wheel from your driveway to a restaurant. I got to very, very honored to have been able to work on that. Also used to work at Boeing and this other startup called Gravity, which I'll show in a sec. And I like writing. but not really. I'm like decent at it, not really. Images, that's much nicer. Yeah, so I guess my background is kind of like some stuff in software, some stuff in hardware, some mix of the two. Starting from the left, this was a really fun startup that I used to work at. They're called Tembo Education, and they're all about bringing an education to children in developing countries without building an entire school, all the overhead and infrastructure that's required for that. Instead, like those like cheap Nokia phones are actually super prevalent in a lot of developing countries. And so bringing an entire education based on text messages, that's what we were doing at Tembo. Of course, I was at Tesla, worked on stuff like this car, stuff like other cars. I was also at Boeing. We worked on different space projects, most of which are pretty secret, but that's one of the projects, Starliner, basically like the clone of SpaceX before SpaceX was cool or whatever. At the bottom right is that company Gravity. So as you can tell, they make jet suits. So it's literally 5 jet engines, 2 on each arm and 1 on the back. And that's actually used to like propel you through the air. Like there's a bladder of jet fuel behind you. And you know, you could probably imagine what it might be like to be fully able to move in 360 degrees. It's a pretty insane experience. So I got to work on some hardware there. This is a terrible screenshot, doesn't really fit in with the rest, but I also ran this thing at Harvard, started at Harvard, which was the first ever hackathon that was held at the Vatican. Does anyone not know what a hackathon is? Is that worth an explanation? Or yeah, so a hackathon is basically it's typically a time constrained event, say 36 hours or 72 hours, and the whole concept here is you know, what can you build in that amount of time? It's a really good opportunity to explore, like in a very sort of low stress environment, new technologies, like new things you might want to just like try out. People build like apps during a hackathon, websites. Some people even do hardware. It's literally anything under the sun is what you could build at a hackathon. Of course, you know, food is typically in abundance, healthy and otherwise. And it's overall just like a really cool community. It's actually sort of like my strongest community at Harvard. And so naturally, you know, things related to hackathons, super interested in. We ran one at the Vatican. So we like partnered with the Catholic Church, and we pulled 120 people from all around the world, brought them into the Vatican, and then had them develop different types of hacks, different types of social projects, all focused around social impact. And so that was a really, really fun time. And then we just wanted to add this quick screenshot of sort of the fun stuff that my co-founder and I work on. Ever since COVID kind of hit, you know, we're kind of constrained to the software space, even though we both love hardware. And there's just so many cool things that we've been able to build and iterate upon. And so these are just 3 of them. The middle one is obviously the big one that we're working on right now. The 2 ones on the side are some of our older projects. As you can tell, we like our dark mode. Cool. So yeah, I'm thinking that sort of the flow of today, I'll kind of talk about the early stages of how projects, startups, ventures kind of get made. We'll start off at like the very, very core, sort of what it means to have a good team. And then we'll say, okay, like you have a team that's united by some concepts. We're going to move into something called like problem space identification. Basically, like how do you scope out sort of what are the problems you want to solve? What are the missions you want to tie yourself to? Things of that nature. And once you have like these big problems that you want to tackle, being able to make it something more palatable to an individual. That's sort of the concept of the user story. And then we'll go into something called an MVP. It's called a minimum viable product. And so I'll be tossing out a bunch of different terms And so let me see if I have the chat feature. If there's anything, actually, I think you guys can raise your hand. It literally just like unmute yourself at any point in time. This is not a, listen to me give a speech and then like just kind of forget it. Like if there's something that you just don't understand, just unmute yourself and go like, Mohib, like, what does like MVP mean? You're saying MVP 20 times. Like, what does that even mean? Just unmute me or unmute yourself and just ask me. This is a chill sort of environment. Yeah, so I think the first thing that's important in understanding like how you build interesting things. I don't even want to start with like what you're coding, like any of that. The first thing is it's all about the people that you work with. And it all begins with a kick-ass team, excuse my language. But that is such an important thing. My freshman year of college, I started this company with a few folks, some of which were incredibly intelligent, some of which were also intelligent, but had some characteristics that made it very difficult to work in a team with, let's just say that. And doesn't matter how awesome the idea is, doesn't matter how like, great every individual is, it's all about the team dynamics that really sets the tone for, is this product or is this even a group project like gonna take off? And I'm sure y'all have all had like awesome group project partners and then really crappy ones. Like you can tell the difference in what makes a team exciting or not. One particular team and sort of company that I absolutely love is called Boosted. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. It's a startup that's based in San Francisco, as most of them are. But they do this really cool thing. It's literally like you might be able to tell it's an electric skateboard. So, there's straight up like, that's a battery right there. That's sort of the controller, and there are two motors on the back wheels. And they just sell this beautiful product. I have one, my co-founder has one. We love like going around in these. And I think equally interesting as a product is sort of the team behind it. The team was 3 Stanford graduate students. And the important thing here, so there's Sanjay, who's sort of the CEO. He really painted the vision of sort of why are they like building electric skateboards in the first place. The big vision that he sort of proposed was, there are better ways to navigate around like a city environment. It doesn't have to be sitting in a car, sitting in traffic 24/7. It doesn't have to be, on a bus, sort of wasting your day away. What if like commuting could be fun? That was really the vision he proposed. John Ullman, who was a CTO, and he was just, a total hardcore engineer. Like he just knew his stuff. And then you had Matt Tran, who was, I think, the CMO. And he was someone who understood how to build brands. And so, if you had 3 awesome makers and you had to build a brand, I'd be like, it's so much about what the individual brings in, but it's also about sort of what sort of you're creating together as a team. And so sort of finding people that complement you is really important. And so just some takeaways. This is like super broad, but it's something that's really good to remember whenever you're thinking about like, who do I want to work with? I think a lot of times in school, you're not given the choice, but in college and sort of beyond, you do have a lot of choice in terms of who you want to work with. And so having some sort of common vision or common thing that brings you together is like the #1 takeaway. If there is no like common ground, it's as if everybody's at different places mentally and like you can't really align on anything. As much as you want to have something in common, that diversity of skill set and background, is really important. It's not diversity for diversity's sake. It is because when you have people that have different strengths, different beliefs, you're just able to create a much more expansive world, as opposed to we all think and do the same thing, and therefore we only understand a small space of the world. What if instead you could widen that so much more if you just had more diversity in thought? Last one is keep it small. I think a lot of teams tend to bloat their group and tend to rule by democracy of 30 for something that could be done by 3 people. Being small, tight, and fast is really important when you're trying to build something big. And of course, as you can probably tell throughout most of this presentation, I'm using startups as like a lot of how I think. That's just kind of the world that I live in. But I hope you can draw some parallels to things outside of just pure like technology companies, because a lot of these things sort of, I think they speak to things that are much more fundamental. Participants can now see you. Have y'all been able to see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I was like, huh?
Oh.
that would have been bad, but okay, good. Sweet. Yeah. So you have a team now. I'd like one thing that could be fun to look at is sort of how you go about picking sort of what to work on, how to work on it. And there's sort of two different paths that's sort of seen in how you can go about creating a project. Mission driven and problem driven. So to be problem driven is there's a clear pain in this world, and our goal is to alleviate that pain. To be mission driven is something more like we have some grand vision of the future. And this grand vision, maybe people don't need it right now. Maybe people don't want it right now. But once we make it, like people will love it. People will desire it. It will become a no-brainer. And so a lot of people ask like, are you building something that is like a vitamin pill or a painkiller? So like a painkiller is to build a problem-driven sort of venture or a company or project. You're out here to tackle someone's particular ailment. You have a sore throat or like a coronavirus or whatever it is. Like there's a particular issue you have, and that's the painkiller. But then there's also the vitamin pill, right? Like there's things that can enhance or supplement your life, and that's typically something more around mission driven. And so people think there's I think there's really a false dichotomy, sort of this artificial pick one way or another in terms of how you sort of create a problem statement. And my answer to that is you kind of have to do both. You need to be mission driven when it comes to the reason for what you're working on. But in terms of what you do on a day-to-day basis, problems are really good to solve. I like to think of this a lot like if you're like a ragtag group of pirates. If you have a problem, that's an enemy. That's someone you need to tackle, someone you need to defeat. And that's like tactically what you should do. Missions give you a reason why we need to defeat the enemy or why we need to conquer that land. And so I think the two are really important in their own different ways. Here's a really good mission statement. This is something that I don't know if it's just because I worked at Tesla for a year, but it's like ingrained into my brain. Like I will never forget this phrase: accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. It's like plastered on our t-shirts. It's everywhere. And I think it's a really good mission because it is super, super big in scope. Like the world is a very big place. Energy is everywhere. And so it pushes for a very grand sort of amount of things that can be impacted. What's really cool is when you have a large enough mission statement that people can love and get behind, you can see a whole host of different products and services and things overall that get built. Within Tesla, even, like obviously they're all about the cars, but Tesla also has like energy storage. So instead of relying on petroleum for harvesting energy and even storing energy, what if instead you had solar power, like solar panels and battery packs? And so that still falls under the mission. What's really, really interesting is like the company Boosted, one could even argue has like a very similar mission statement. Hey, instead of buying a car to navigate around New York City. What if you bought this skateboard? It's fun, it's good for the environment, and it just makes sense overall. That's a really good mission statement, one in which like it could be very clear that like, hey, what one day if Tesla wants to move into outside of cars and more into like micromobility, scooters and skateboards and stuff like that, Boosted is someone that could be acquired, or Boosted is someone that fits their mission statement. That's really important to have an all-encompassing mission statement. A good problem statement is, I would say, is comprised of answering a few key questions. So, what is the problem? Who has the problem? How are they solving it right now? And why is the current solution just not working? It's really, really important. I think we'll sort of unpack this concept as we go. I don't want to belabor the point, but it is really harder than we may think to define exactly who has the problem. We'll talk about go-to-market strategy, and we'll talk about what it means to go from a problem statement to an individual that you could help as a result of creating that problem statement, and sort of that sort of transfer from a high-level problem statement to a real product. That's sort of what we can unpack as we go. Using Boosted as an example, so the tactical problem that Boosted has, or that they're trying to solve here, is that it's really hard to get around urban environments. Who has the problem? It's not people, it's not everybody, it's people living in cities. And in fact, I would say this slide's kind of wrong too. It's not everybody living in cities. It's probably people that are able to stand on 2 feet, probably younger demographics. Like, I don't imagine like my 85-year-old grandpa is gonna enjoy zooming down the street, in a Boosted board. And so who has a problem is a really tricky question, because you want to be really tight with the language. And then you ask the question of like, what are they doing today to solve the problem? There's many ways you can commute a city. People aren't just walking. You can rent a bike, but what if the bikes aren't there? What if you have to bike 10 miles a day? That would kind of suck. You get really tired and sweaty. Buses and trains run every X minutes. What if you need something right now? Sometimes buses just don't show up. I'm from Los Angeles, and I'll tell you, like every single time I've relied on a bus to come at the time it promises, it just doesn't turn up, which is painful. And of course, cars cost a ton of money, rush hour traffic, typically just not very eco-friendly. Most cars are gas. And so that's sort of what a problem statement is. But honestly, like looking at this, like you see nowhere in here like an electric skateboard. You see nowhere in here like an electric car, or really any solution here. And this is where sort of the problem statement comes down into something called the user story, something that's much more palatable, something you can actually sort of visualize. The whole goal of the user story is to sort of create a persona for the person you're trying to help. When you bring something into a, for example, look at X person, it makes the whole concept of what you're trying to do really, really actionable and sort of understandable. And so I want to first focus on what's called like the archetype. And so the archetype is sort of all about the, it's all about sort of defining kind of what the person is that you want to focus on. What we're going to use for this sort of example, like instead of giving you all definitions, like I think you'll get a better sense of it if we just tell a story. So we're going to start with the archetype. We're going to go into sort of what pain point that archetypal individual has, or this sort of stereotypical individual in our problem, what they have. What is our call to action to them, and then how do we sort of hook and sink? How do we land kind of a sale in the thing that they're interested in? And so let's use Tesla as an example. And this will be a fun sort of like history lesson of some sorts about the origins of Tesla, which a lot of people don't really know about. And I think is really interesting and says a lot to how big companies started, which is always an interesting sort of an interesting exploration. So the archetype for somebody as customer number one at Tesla, as you could probably imagine, is a very rich person. It's someone who has a ton of excess money, someone who cares about the flex, like is where sort of telling other people that like I am better than you in some way, not explicitly, but like kind of, you know, subliminally. It's important, you know. And most importantly, or somewhat importantly, you want to show other people like not only am I rich, but like I also care to some extent. There's like the term virtue signaling, which is definitely weaponized a lot. And this is one way like it gets weaponized. You know, how do you basically sell something to someone so that they think that they're signaling to other people that they're better human beings? That is, you know, these are the kind of things you talk about in an archetype. Sort of, what is the character? What are their descriptions that are advantageous to the business you're about to make? And so our buddy Joe has a very important pain point here. Enjoy the images. And so the pain point, as it's probably self-explanatory here, it's about sort of where are they struggling in some way. And so the big one for something like Tesla is you have these super rich people, the archetype, but the problem is they feel really guilty. And why do they feel guilty? It's typically because like they just have so much money, and you know, the world is crumbling in more ways than ever before, and you know, they're sitting there just having a jolly good time, which is kind of, you know, like even for me as a not rich person, it kind of sucks to see the world melting and, you know, people like us sort of living good lives. And it's like, okay, cool. So go work at a nonprofit and go, you know, fix real problems. Like, no. He has a very nice looking watch. Those suspenders were not cheap. He's not going to drop his lifestyle in order to go save the world. Like, let's be real, rich people don't want to do that. They won't do that. They'll want to live like comfortable lifestyles. So that's a pain point, right? They want to help the world, but they're just too rich to care. And so this is where the call to action comes in. This is where you ask a question that sort of incites, it kind of inspires the person to go like, yeah, like I do want this. And so, you know, you ask Joe, like, do you want to be part of this environmental revolution? Do you want to have something that very few people ever have? And do you want to feel really awesome while having it? That's where you go buy a Tesla. And, you know, think of the concept of purchasing sort of this brand new, super sexy electric sports car. The money to a multimillionaire, probably 200K, which was the initial price of the very first Tesla. It's probably not that much, like, you know, whatever. Very few people have it though. A, because there's not that much being, they didn't make that many cars, but then B, because few people can even afford it. And so you get that exclusivity part of it. In terms of actually using the product, you know, it's a super fast car. 0 to 60 in 2.1 seconds. It is like dirty fast. And, you know, most importantly, the fact that they can stick the landing and go, yeah, like by buying this super nice sports car, I am like totally like helping the environment. Yeah, like I'm doing my part here. That is super, super big, because suddenly now like a purchase of a product is tied to the virtue signaling. And Tesla did this incredibly well. This was sort of Tesla's entire strategy. Go to the rich people that are guilty about not being environmentally friendly, that are guilty about not being able to save the world because they work at a bank, and sell them something, sell them a vision, sell them an actual product that makes them feel like they're playing their part. And if you get enough rich people to buy cars like this, that finances Tesla to be able to learn how to make cars that are cheaper. And if you can make cars that are cheaper, that funnel just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the price of 200K gets lower and lower. And so this is really looking at the very first user story of customer number 1 at Tesla is a really good exercise to understanding how you go from like, okay, we want to like solve environmental problems and solve this whole transportation kind of issue, how that turns into, and we build our first product here. It's a very interesting analogy, but this was a user story just for the customer, the individual rich Joe that was purchasing a vehicle. There are a lot more sort of stakeholders involved here. And I just threw a bunch of information there. I want to pause for a second and ask if anyone just has any questions or any curiosities before we move into the MVP, which is a pretty, it's a pretty juicy part in terms of building a product. So any questions, comments, things that interest you, things you don't get?
I have a couple of small comments. I really love the way that you frame the whole problem solving and the user story. I think it's a great way to like, you know, kind of really talk about and explore how, you know, we take problems and we expand them out. And, you know, it goes to show that you can always start off with something very simple, but then you can always ask like, very detailed questions and always dive into, you know, those kinds of things. And you end up finding out that there's so much more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the user story is a really good way of bringing sort of the, you're sort of like kind of, when you're building a product, you are jumping at so many different layers of abstraction or sort of different layers of thinking. You have like the bird's eye view, sort of the, what is the big mission? If we are successful in 30 years, like what are we? And then you're jumping down to the layer of like, okay, how do we like sell something today? Or how do we build something that people want today? And yeah, the user story is a really good way of like answering the question of like, what do people actually feel when they see what you built or when they use what you built? How do you actually get to them? Those are all great questions the user story answers. Cool. All right. So I want to move into the MVP. So the MVP is a term that's used a lot in building technology, and it's typically called the minimum viable product. And I want to sort of offer a bit of a change, and I think this change is pretty important here. So at a high level, like what a minimum viable product is I think I define it in literally the next one. Nope, maybe I didn't. Overall, sort of what the minimum viable product is what is the minimum amount of work that you need to do, or rather, what is the minimum scoped, you know, app or car or, you know, nonprofit launch, whatever it is, the minimum amount of things you need to do in order to be able to launch and see if your idea actually works. It's about cutting as much fat as possible and only doing what matters and what can help you achieve some form of learning. Learning being like, did this actually work? Did it not? Are people going to pay for it? Are they not? But the problem with sort of the concept of minimum viable product is it's thought in a very, very narrow scope. It's thought of as, you know, let's design this app and what features is it going to have? No, we need less features. Or, you know, let's build out this nonprofit and let's move into, you know, this certain type of work. No, like let's do half of that. The problem here is that products are about what people touch and programs is about the systems and the decisions made to get to that point. Where somebody can feel and touch and use the products that you deliver. And so, you know, I think the important thing here to take home is, you know, it's not just about sort of what is the quickest and dirtiest, you know, first product that you create that people get to use, but it's about sort of like, what are the systems that you create in order to get there? sort of, we'll unpack that. I think that sort of breaks down into three main things. It's stakeholder analysis, which we'll get into, the actual MVP, which is the minimum viable product, as most people in sort of technology would call it. And then finally, the go-to-market strategy. This is like, you have something, how do you get it to people? All of these sort of together is what I say creates a minimum viable program. And I'd argue that this is really what's important here, not just sort of what is the app design, but the MVP product. It's everything around it too. So starting off with like identifying key stakeholders. This one's pretty important. Like we kind of talked about with the whole Joe buying a Tesla because he's rich and sad. That's just one of the customers. It's worth teasing it out a little bit more. So you have the end user, primary economic buyer, champion, and influencer. There are many more. I'm oversimplifying this quite a bit, but I'm just going to talk about 4 interesting ones that are worth mentioning. First thing that's pretty interesting to note is that the end user and the primary economic buyer were listed sort of separately. They're like your users and your customers could be very different people. So let's think of something like an Uber. The end user of Uber is, people that need to move around in a city or people that need to commute from one place to another. Typically, the people that pay for the product are, the person who's calling the ride. That's like pretty straightforward. But Uber actually, during when they went public as a company and sort of started getting bigger and bigger, they very quickly turned into partnering with companies that are based in urban environments and saying, hey, instead of purchasing a bunch of parking space for your employees, what if we sold you like basically Uber coupons? And those coupons you guys could use to, as a company, subsidize your workers or your employees sort of commuter benefits. And so suddenly now the primary economic buyer is not just the person who's calling the ride. It could be that the company that that person who's calling a ride works for. Maybe they pay for the ride and now the user and the buyer are separate. That's just one interesting sort of intricacy worth noting. Another one is the champion. So like who absolutely just needs what you're building, loves what you're building. Like, even if you didn't pay them, like, they would rave about you all day and night. I think, for something like in the Tesla case, typically is the rich people. What kind of rich person doesn't want to tell all their friends about how rich they are? For something like, maybe some of us have heard of, like, there's a new social media app that's coming out. I think it's more in like the college student bubble right now, but it's definitely getting younger and younger and younger. It's like a new social network called Clubhouse. And it's like an audio only social media. Does anyone know about that? Like, I'm actually really curious. Has anyone heard of Clubhouse?
Yeah, a little.
What do you guys know about it? Like,
I think that it's like
I just
really
heard my brother
exclusive.
mention it, and I don't ask him about it. So it's that.
But yeah, I've heard of it was like really exclusive or something.
Yeah, it's like you have to have an invite in order to get in. It's one of those like like what's behind the gates of heaven sort of concept. The people that fell in love with Clubhouse and sort of the way that they created this, like, oh, you need to know someone to get in, was because the investors in Clubhouse were the people that were tweeting about it and telling the whole world, we love Clubhouse. And so like those were the champions of the product. They had a clear financial incentive to be the champions of the product. So they can love your product for very different reasons. And then there's, of course, the influencer. So who would Didi pay to promote Uber? I don't want to go too deep into this, but there's a Chinese transportation company called Didi. And there was some interesting fights between the two. some involving corporate giants, some involving influencers in China. But essentially the question you have to ask is like, if like, would the Kardashians want to promote Uber, or like would Mark Zuckerberg want to promote Uber? Interesting questions to seeing sort of what stakeholders you need to align to figure out where you want to grow. I think what's pretty, yes, I did define it. Yes, the minimum viable product. Definition here is kind of exactly what we were talking about. But once you kind of understand like who you're building for and what the intricacies of each stakeholder are, then you finally can get down to the real work of it. And there's sort of 3 stages of increasing maturity. You would start off with something called like just a wireframe, which is like, think of it like a comic book almost for something like an app. And I'll show you on the next slide an example of my own company's work. But for an app, a simple sketch like on a piece of paper of like what the thing could look like. If you're doing something sort of much more physical, that could be literally like comic books. I used to like go to a few like classes at MIT where people would sketch out how like a person would be working out with like a brand new fitness equipment. And so really like nice high level sketches. That's a really good place to be able to criticize ideas and try out different things without committing to, a hardcore 20 hours investment of anyone's time. It's really good to sort of just get a feel for what you want to do. Once you kind of have a better feel for that, that's when you sort of graduate to the mock-up stage. And a mock-up is kind of like a product rendering, if any of y'all have heard that. Like that's the, someone made a really nice like Photoshopped version of it, or like a 3D model of it. And that's typically really good because it finally puts into real visual or auditory sort of senses what it is you're about to do. So for example, SpaceX is amazing at this. I don't know how they do it, but they just have like these beautiful renderings of like, there's one of them that's like, it's like a spaceship that like docks into like the side of a beach or something. And you go on board of that spaceship and it kind of just like parabola kind of goes over the earth, and it gets you from, I think they said like San Francisco to Shanghai in 30 minutes, which is like insane. If you told me that with words, I'd be like, no. But if you create this like crazy video, which they did, this amazing product rendering, suddenly now like you see it, you can see what they actually mean by it. Of course, it's insanely hard to do because it's a mock-up for that reason. At some point in time, you eventually graduate to the stage of the actual prototype, which is something that's functional, working, that people can actually use. And so just wanted to quickly share how rough and tough a very first sort of sketch wireframe can be. So this is one of the products that my co-founder and I are working on shipping right now. And our whole thing was like, okay, how do we bring donation to as many people as possible? We really wanted to tackle the donation space. And we were just like, okay, like I'm not going to log onto a website and like make an account on GoFundMe. And then after I make an account, then I have to put in my credit card information, also my billing address, and then I can donate. It's like, no. What if you could just use Apple Pay? And so we basically were creating like a whole repository of a bunch of different causes you could be interested in donating to, all like on your phone, like in the version of an app instead of like a web app. And so our things are super high level. You see, like we have stuff crossed out. We have sort of things bubbling into other things. We have a bunch of crazy notes all around. It's like a total, like you wouldn't actually be tapping this at all. But that was an amazing sort of place for us to have conversation to eventually be able to make this. And these are the mock-ups. These are completely like photoshopped to some extent with this program called Figma. If you're interested in learning more about that, when we move into questions, I'm happy to talk more about that. But essentially, like now you can actually see what we've been talking about. And now you kind of have an idea of like, oh, like these are the colors, this is the layout. Here's how the thing might actually look. And so that's a mock-up. In terms of the prototype, you'll have to wait. Our product launch is coming up very soon, so you'll see the prototype very soon. Final thing I want to talk about is sort of your go-to-market strategy. So you've identified who you're building for. Let's say you've created your MVP, but now you're sitting with an awesome product. You're sitting knowing the intricacies of who wants and how they want your product, but you have no way to go from like you know, you have the product. What do you do with it now? And so the first thing I would sort of talk about is the beachhead market. And the beachhead market is sort of the concept of who is customer number one. As in, where do you go? Where do you park your lemonade stand on the side of the beach? So that exactly the kind of people you want to target have to walk as little as possible to your lemonade stand to get the lemonade that you're dropping. And so a lot of times a beachhead market is the champion. If you think of it like, if you can sell the people that totally love what you're building first, they're going to tell their friends and they will tell their friends. And that's going to be really good for a business and for seeing your product actually get to real people's hands. Aside from that concept, you can think of go-to-market strategy in three sort of big bubbles: marketing, sales, distribution. Marketing is all about discovery. This is pretty much an answered question if you're doing something like an app. Like, you list your app on the App Store, sure. Like, you can pay Google to toss ads all over the internet for you, sure. But the best marketing teams go far, far beyond that. They do things that are out of the norm. They do sort of what's called growth hacky kind of methods of getting their product out there to the world. It's a really interesting question to ask. Like, how does somebody on the street eventually find out what you're building? Sales is sort of how do they purchase it? There's a lot of awesome like payment providers. Honestly, I'm very biased. I'm more from an engineer side of things. So this is the shortest slide and the thing I'll talk the least about. But sales is how do people buy your stuff? And then distribution, how do you get it out to people? I worked a little bit in distribution at Tesla, and it is an absolute nightmare, like figuring out like how you get parts from all around the world into Fremont, California to build the car, and then how a car goes from Fremont, California to Texas to New York to Canada. It's insane. So for some things it's easier than others. For an app, it's super simple, like the download on the App Store. But that's sort of like what the go-to-market strategy is. And sort of everything we've been talking about, I would say, is all about how do you launch like the very first iteration of what you're building. How do you go from nothing to a team, to a problem, into a mission, into a person that you want to solve the problem for, the user story, and then finally to a minimum viable program. But that is nowhere close to the end of it all. It gets absolutely insane from that point out. This is an awesome graph that sort of shows the beauty of running a company. It is, you build up hype, the TechCrunch initiation. Everybody loves you. Everybody wants to see you succeed. And suddenly, as soon as you're ready to open your doors for business, people were just generating hype around you. There's a lot of ups and downs, as you can tell. And so a lot of building stuff is really about knowing that what you have today is not going to be the end product. There's going to be a lot of iterations. There's going to be a lot of discovery within yourself and within the customers, sort of figuring out where you fit in the world. This talk is sort of all about putting the very first steps out there. So with that, kind of done talking at you. I've heard my voice long enough for 21 years. So these slides will all be available if you just hit that link. So you can always revisit these whenever you need. And if you ever want to reach out to me, of course, get my socials. But I'd love for the rest of this time, however much time we have left, just to be like super casual, like tell me what you're interested in. Like if you have any questions, fully open to that now.
You said that was a bad slideshow, but it was like actually really well put together, bro. It was good.
Appreciated.
I guess I can get started with one kind of easy question. How applicable do you think these ideas are to other industries? Maybe not like necessarily involved in the startup field or in tech in general.
Yeah, I think the principles are pretty foundational to everything. I would say let's pick an industry that has nothing to do with technology. Like, do you have any, Brian? Like,
maybe like medicine.
Okay, let's do something like let's do something even harder. Like, because medicine could be like biotech, but that's tech. Let's do something like really hardcore. Chick-fil-A, perfect. That's literally medicine to me. It is my weekly fix. So yeah, something like Chick-fil-A, right? Like you are starting out, like think of the very first day. Like I don't know who founded Chick-fil-A, but whoever made Chick-fil-A kind of had to sit there with no restaurants anywhere, maybe like a recipe for like this really awesome chicken sandwich, and like that's kind of it. The concept of shipping something really small to test the waters is something that I haven't found an industry in which that doesn't really apply. For example, the Chick-fil-A founder is not going to buy up real estate in 30 different properties to get his Chick-fil-A empire started. No, he is going to make one Chick-fil-A store, and is going to focus like all his efforts on making that one kick-ass Chick-fil-A restaurant. So there's that part. And then, if we're talking about sort of the user story, I guess you could make a pretty funny user story around like someone wanting chicken. Like Joe is now a rich guy, but his pain point is like he likes chicken sandwiches. That's a bit on the sillier side, but like in terms of stakeholder analysis, there's a lot of interesting questions that somebody who's starting like a food and restaurant business would have to ask around like, okay, like you have where your food is sourced from, you have the providers that get you to that source, you have your customers that are paying you, you have investors, you have the Food and Drug Administration that's monitoring everything you do. And so creating sort of a world that makes everybody happy, or at least makes the right people very happy. I think that sort of framework of stakeholder analysis works in sort of in most industries. I think the one thing to really drive home here, it's like in like the moment, a lot of what you'll learn if you're interested in the technology space or building companies is you kind of already know if we talked about user story, that's like another way of saying, can you give me an example of who enjoys what you're building? These are all sort of like building a company is just a formal way of accelerating human progress is the way that I like to think of it. And human progress, I think that's an inevitable thing that all of us have, the desire to be better and to help others. I think what hopefully this talk kind of shows is like, forget the industry, just look at literally any way we go about doing things in the world. You know, even when you're submitting like a homework assignment, the concept of like the enemy of good is perfect. That's what an MVP is all about. How do you ship something today that works instead of something in 3 years that might work? And so, yeah, this is just a way to formalize things you already know. How have y'all not had Chick-fil-A before?
It's just so wrong. It's so wrong, bro.
No.
Everyone at
There's
my school
none
works
near
there.
me.
Like,
And the one
everyone
time
works
I had it, it sucked so.
Yeah, there's none near me.
How
either.
old were you? Tell me how old you were.
This was literally like 8th grade 2 years ago.
Okay. You were like 4 and picky. That's fine.
Okay, wait,
Also,
Abby, what?
Actually, I know the information about the passage. I know the history of Chick-fil-A. All right. This guy, you know, it was actually Colonel Sanders, the real Colonel Sanders. He's working at a different place, and he pitches his sandwich to them, and they're like, fine, whatever, like make it, and everyone loves it. Jafri makes money from that. He goes to a different place, and he starts his own company, not called Chick-fil-A, but it works out for him. Yeah, that's the beginning, I guess.
Wait, so Colonel Sanders did Chick-fil-A and KFC?
It's all
Not
ploy.
Colonel
to
Sanders.
have two
Confusion.
industries
I
fighting
am
against each
so
other.
dumb. It's fine. I'm so dumb.
Also,
no,
I
I
think
think you're
Colonel
onto
Sanders is a fictional character, right?
No, Colonel Sanders is
Uh-huh.
real. He's
I
real.
didn't get the
He's a real
sandwich
guy.
at Chick-fil-A.
I don't think he was
I
actually
had
a colonel. No,
nuggets
he
for
was a
some
colonel. He
reason.
was a colonel. He's a real guy. You can Google him. Original quote.
Anyway.
Just because you
real.
can Google something doesn't mean it's real.
Anyways.
Colonel Sanders made Chick-fil-A confirmed.
Alright, I have some homework to do because I don't know who to believe anymore. I
Too much
mean, yeah,
misinformation.
yeah, this misinformation is strong here. He definitely made KFC, like he's the logo for crying out loud, you know?
Sorry, I was just being dumb. I'm sorry. I confused them. I was like sandwich. Okay, but I do know the history of Chick-fil-A also. They claim that they had the original Chick-fil-A sandwich. I don't know the guy's name. But they claim to have the original Chick-fil-A sandwich, and it's just like still a family-owned place, kind of. You know how that is. But yeah, so they just had kids, and the kids made new stores. That was the whole premise. That's how they got more companies. How they got more.
Yeah, the McDonald's story is also really interesting. There's a really good documentary on Netflix on it. It's like, it's so crazy. Like, I always thought, like, obviously my industry is like technology and stuff, and I was like, oh, it's so cutthroat here. There's like so many people. There's a ton of money and competition. No, like the restaurant industry is wild. Like, the McDonald's, I think the chairman or whatever, like he was ruthless in growing McDonald's. Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. Why must every food I love be destroyed with rodents for stray animals? Huh. That I do not know.
I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
So we talked about like Tesla and guilt, but what's really interesting about that is that Tesla like was the first person to do that. Most people, they appeal to like love, or they appeal to fear, you know, or sometimes just like pity. They don't usually appeal to guilt. So what's your plan? What do you plan to appeal to?
Oh, so that's actually, I'll make one correction to Tesla as a roundabout way of giving me more time to answer the second part of the question. So I would say the interesting part about Tesla is that they were fueled by both guilt and I think Tesla's secret was converting guilt into sex appeal. Like this is the big one here. It is, you know, like everyone knows like the world is burning. I mean, there's some people that don't believe it. Forget those people for a second. Most people understand that the world is in a very, very bad position. And like rich people know that too. And, you know, the Al Gore days of like sort of guilting people into wanting to save the earth is like it doesn't really make sense in the world we live in. Like, that's just not how people think. They're not going to love to be guilted into things all the time. And so what Tesla created was the sex drive. It is, you feel guilty, but like, damn, like, let me empower you with a sexy car. Let me empower you with like the social status of being above other people. And the byproduct of that was helping the environment. And so I'd say like what Tesla really did was guilt became sort of the secondary effect. The primary effect of is I want this shiny new toy. And I think that's totally awesome. In terms of how we're thinking about it, I think we think about it in a similar way at Seed. You know, I think like every GoFundMe is really sad. And I have no idea why you would want to like always be looking at sad stuff. And so that's like you know, being able to find other core human emotions other than guilt as a motive to help others is really important here. So as you kind of might have seen through the screenshots, there's a lot of social proofing going on in Seed, sort of where you can show other people what causes you donate to sort of like kind of bolster up what your image is in terms of the money you donate or the things you like to help out at. Other concepts that we are really interested in is like, our big one here is like, I'm like pretty sure if you just made the way people donated a little bit better, you can access like a lot more people. If you've ever gone to any GoFundMe website, the website looks terrible. Like it kind of looks like something like our parents would use, to be honest. Like it looks like it was made in 2005. But what if it was like as simple as like Robinhood or like as seamless as something like Snapchat? I think like even like Instagram right now, there's like a feature where you can like you can tip people during a live, like when they're doing an IG live. And it's literally like you click tip and you tip $1 and it's like you use Face ID for Apple Pay and then you can give them $1. Our thing here is like, if you can lower that barrier of sort of the friction of the experience and sort of make it as smooth of an experience as possible, that's going to encourage so many more people to want to donate. And so that's a bit about what we have, but you know, we're, I think the story is still being written. So, you know, maybe in 10 years, we'll have something interesting to say, kind of like Tesla.
This reminds me of, I was really just thinking about it when you mentioned Robinhood. There's another thing called public.com. They were doing this. We want investing to be as public as possible. Maybe people want to invest because they're seeing how other people are investing. And they're making all your transactions public. You can see like this, like our Joe sold 3,000 shares of whatever stock they bought 8 months ago and made 3,000%. And you can just see other. It'll be cool to invest, and it's like a really similar flashy idea too.
Jeez, that's like that already gave me a sinking feeling in my chest. I was like, I don't want to. But maybe, I mean, I think the concept of social around doing things that are seen as more private is a really cool concept. There's actually a company started out of Harvard called Finery, and their whole thing is around like, you know, like to be honest, we're all just a bunch of normal people who pretend to know what stocks are, to pretend to know like, oh, Bitcoin's going to go up, or like, you know, like put money in that or sell this, or, you know, forget GameStop or pump in GameStop or whatever. We don't really know what's going on here. It's all just a social thing. And so a few friends of mine at Harvard are building this, this like, it's like, think of it kind of like Robinhood and Snapchat meet together. So like you could message other people and make group chats all around like, yo, like, what do you guys think about GameStop right now? Like, I don't know, like, the SEC is kind of on them right now for, you know, insert issue or whatever, like being able to chat about stocks right before you buy a stock. yeah, social and private stuff. It's scary, it's frothy, but it's a really interesting space to be in.
Yeah, and Venmo is like one of the, I guess, successful examples of how things started from like, let me just write you a $5 ticket, or like, I'm just give you $5 in cash to, I'm gonna share you with the entire world. I paid you $5 for a chicken dinner.
Yeah, I keep most of my Venmos on private. I also have absurd captions, so I don't like I don't let those captions go out. Tesla is just adding money to a wallet. What do you mean by that? Curious.
I mean, I think a lot of companies are also adding money to wallet, so I think you'd have to, maybe phrase that a little bit differently. But yeah, but they are selling stuff. They are doing stuff.
Fair.
Yeah.
Did this talk spark any thoughts? Anything that you don't agree with? I'm curious about that too. A lot of this stuff is like half stuff that I've read, half stuff that I've learned, and like a small sprinkle of stuff I believe, like that I've just kind of thought of on my own. Yeah, does anyone have like anything that really stuck with them, or things that they just don't quite fully like or understand?
A lot of things I just saw is like, this is something that happens a lot of the time, but also like they're like a third of the time, and then there's another thing that happens another third of the time, another thing that happens last third, because products aren't the same a lot. I'm in economics, so it's just a lot of different product development and stuff. So I guess this is what I'm learning about right now.
Yeah, it's definitely different products. There are different beasts as you sort of think about what you want to do in the world. I think there's a lot of sort of common undertones that kind of unite a lot of industries. I'm curious, what is everyone here? Feel free to just like unmute yourself and like, what are y'all interested in? Like computer science? I know this is like more of like a computer science-esque kind of like a group, but is that all that you are interested in, or is there more?
I keep talking. I have a lot to say. I'm a talkative person. Anyway, I plan to go into school for like journalism. So like appealing to emotion is something that's really important. I write a lot of opinion pieces, so that's my thing right now. No.
Yeah, feel free to drop it in chat if you're not comfortable with like unmuting. I don't know. I know that like a lot of you guys don't unmute a lot, but feel free to chat it if you want.
I'm planning to go to some sort of engineering. I'm not sure what type yet, though.
Sweet.
I'm looking to go into aerospace engineering.
A lot of them are also slightly younger in high school, so they probably wouldn't have a super solid idea. I think I talked to a few of them, and most of them gave answer like, I know I'm going to engineering somewhat, and unsure which specific field I'm gonna step into yet.
Sweet. That's
I think all
telecommunication.
Yeah.
Dang,
Yeah. No, I
didn't-
think like going off of what Minji said real quick. I think that's completely fine if you don't have any idea of what you want to do. But if you found this, what Mohib was mentioning, I was talking about, the idea of ideating and creating stuff, problem solving. If it sounds interesting, maybe you might find some inspiration to pursue, engineering or business or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that I wish like college counselors at high schools kind of reframe the way that they taught this, but like it is so I don't want to say useless, but it is really, it is tough to expect like a 10th grader to know what they want to do for the rest of their life. Like, I think it's totally absurd. Like, even as a senior in high school, like you have seen not even a percent of what the world has to offer. And somehow you're expected to make a decision off of no information. The saying goes, like, you know, like people in college change their major like 3 times before they settle on something. And the fact that like we are okay with college students figuring it out, but for some reason, when you're applying to colleges or when you're a high school student, you better know what you're good at that point in time. It's like, it's sort of antithetical to exploration. And so, I don't know, for me at least, like if I were a college counselor, I probably would stop like asking students like, what do you want to be, like an engineer, like a doctor, like whatever thing when you grow up. I'd probably just say like, you know, what causes or what sort of problems speak to you? Like, that is much more of an interesting question, right? Like, if you care about issues of the environment, and let's say like animals, maybe like really you're deeply passionate about, there's 1,000 different ways that you can go about helping sort of with like animal equality or solving issues of animal abuse. You know, you can do that from a business point of view, from like an engineering point of view, from a medical, a veterinarian. Like, there's 1,000 ways to do it. And so I feel like when we're younger, like it's so important. I have to remind myself this too. Like, just like look at what you care about as opposed to how you want to show that you care about something. That's like so much more important.
Yeah, I was also talking to someone this afternoon, one of you this afternoon, that we talked about how in terms of like high school, the course load that high schools are able to offer, they like, which resulting in a consequence that like most people who wants to go into some STEM field after high school decided to go to computer science, because apparently there's no other classes offered in high school other than computer science. And they never, high schools don't offer hardware engineering, don't offer aerospace engineering. And you really have to push yourself to explore more to find out where you fit into college. And yeah, you know, like, so I would always want to ask people to like find out the range that they can go for first, and then settle down on something.
There's this STEM school near my school, and the only class that they offer that I want to take, like they have no computer science or anything. The only class they offer that I want to take is cultural anthropology. Really, like, you're a STEM school. You're a STEM school. You're supposed to do things. Like, it's so sad.
That is sick though. I would say more STEM people need to get out of STEM. There's a lot of value to leaving your industry. Or saying, you know, like, I am an X kind of person who cares about these things. Go in the opposite direction and see what happens. Like, that's, I don't know why STEM school has cultural anthropology, but I see that as a win for everybody that exists.
And I guess, you know, it goes to say that you don't necessarily have to keep going in the other direction. You know, the whole point of it is to explore and reach out of your comfort zone, you know. Yeah.
I'm curious, but what's your, like, if you have to give advice to like 9th, 10th graders, most of them are 9th, 10th graders, what is your like one thing that maybe you regret not doing in high school, or like one thing that you want to share?
Yeah, I'd say the way I went about extracurriculars didn't fully make sense. I think like, well, I mean, first of all, extracurriculars are an awesome way to just like test out the waters and see what you're interested in. I think maybe this is very context specific, but I went to a high school. It was a public school in Los Angeles, California. where we were sort of like bred like racehorses. It was really weird. It was like a very competitive. It's actually, I felt it was more competitive than Harvard. Just a super like, I don't know. It was a place where like, you know, you start a club in 9th or 10th grade, or you join a club in 9th or 10th grade, and you're expected to stay through it so that you could become a president or VP or whatever by your junior or senior year. That shows growth. Colleges love growth. They love seeing leaders and check, check, check. I would have sort of told myself, and of course I did that to some extent. I would say, like, say yes to a ton of things, but be ruthless in shutting them down when they no longer provide you value. So, you know, taking the approach of like, okay, I'm gonna dive super deep into student government. And if I love it, great, double down into it. If I start not liking it, give yourself a time period, give yourself 1 semester or 1 school year. And if you really just like, it just sucks, you know, there's no reason to stay there and to, you know, stay there just to be the president eventually of a club that you don't like. So say yes to a bunch of things, which I think a lot of people can do. And I can do that myself. But then also being able to say no, throw away the things you don't care about and just focus on the things you do care about. In other words, just like follow the things you care about, throw away the shit that you don't.
Cool.
Yeah. I also like never did anything. I didn't even take computer science in high school. Was not part of the robotics club. Like I did like science bowl, if anyone knows what that is. Yeah, the whole buzzer thing, but that's like more on the hard sciences. I did like nothing engineering in high school. So, and I guess now people call me an engineer. So, you know, you'll find your own way around things, however it happens.
Any more questions for everyone else? All right. I mean, thank you so much, Mohib, for coming in. And I think we can. The students are always like welcome to reach out to you, and you can drop your like email address or social in the chat, and we'll also put that onto the Fellow Central's the calendar events, so you guys can see the recording of this, the slides, and also the contact information. And you can always reach out if you're interested in the things that he does, or you know, want to ask any questions. So yeah, thank you so much. And everyone else would stay for like another 10-20 minutes to quickly debrief and talk about next steps. And thanks, Mohib, for coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having me. I wish you all the best. Reach out to me. Brian tossed in my information down below. If you need me for anything, sounding board for what to do with your future, just someone to talk about what high school is like or what college is like, because I'm in college. Yeah, please use me as a resource. Just hit me up whenever. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
All right. So